Hey everyone, it's me, the Bossk guy. Bossk is by far my most played hero, and I've made quite a few videos playing as him in the past, so I thought it would be fitting to make a full in-depth guide for how to play him. Bossk is one of the strongest heroes in Battlefront 2 because of the combination of his versatile kit, reliable abilities, and strong star cards. However, I think many people don't quite understand how to play him, or at least almost certainly use the wrong star cards. So in this video, I'll be going over Bossk's stats, abilities, star cards, gameplay strategy, and some tips. Pretty much everything you need to know to play Bossk. There are also a few things I want to clarify before we get started. Firstly, this guide will go over everything from Bossk's basics to the advanced stuff, but I will be assuming that you at least have some basic knowledge of how Battlefront 2 is played and how the different game modes function. Secondly, this is not a guide for how to killstreak as Bossk. A lot of the stuff I'll be going over may help in killstreaking, but I won't be covering any killstreaking methodology. And thirdly, this guide will not really be that helpful if you want to play Bossk on the Kyber modded servers, as he has been changed quite a lot in the mod pack that's used in their official servers. With that out of the way, let's get started, and the first thing to cover is Bossk's stats. First, let's begin by talking about Bossk's blaster. Bossk has a very unique gun that's essentially two weapons in one with widely different stats, depending on whether you're scoped in or not. When hip firing, Bossk's weapon more or less becomes a slug shotgun. It fires one bullet that can't headshot, deals very high damage at close ranges, and has a severe damage fall off at longer ranges. If the enemy is within 8 meters, the weapon will deal its full damage of 126, but beyond that, the damage will gradually fall off and hit its lowest point from 22 meters and onwards, now only dealing a measly 45 damage. The weapon's fire rate is 100 rounds per minute, and it will overheat after firing 8 shots, meaning you can fire a little less than 2 bolts every second, and you can fire continuously for about 5 seconds before overheating. When switching to the scoped weapon mode, it will instead become a very powerful sniper, dealing up to 156 damage to the body and 296 damage to the head, if charged up fully, which takes about 1.5 seconds. All the other weapon stats remain the same except for the damage fall off, which is removed completely as the weapon now deals the same damage at all ranges. And that's all for Bossk's blaster, so let's have a look at his individual hero stats. Now, as I'm sure you know, every hero also has a few unique traits, such as their base health and their maximum health regeneration. Bossk is very unique in this regard, as he's the only hero capable of regenerating all of his health back, while the rest of the hero roster can only regenerate a portion of their total HP. This is of course very beneficial for Bossk's survivability, but it comes with 3 rather large downsides. The first one being that his regeneration speed is only 25 health per second, only half as fast as most other heroes. This really is the biggest downside in his kit, and you kind of have to adjust Bossk's playstyle around his slow regen. In practice, this often means having to spend a lot of time out of the action just to regenerate back your health. The second downside is that Bossk doesn't get the health on kill passive that all other heroes get, making him the only hero without a passive ability. This is however not as big of a deal as the health regeneration because Bossk doesn't actually need to get kills to regain lost health. The third and final downside is that Bossk's base health of 600 is very low, as he shares the lowest maximum health of all heroes together with Boba, Finn, and BB9E. A low base health means that Bossk is very vulnerable to burst damage, and this is not helped by the fact that enemies are kind of incentivized to go all in against Bossk, even if they themselves die in the process, as otherwise he can just regenerate all that lost health. Despite all these flaws, Bossk still has pretty good survivability just based on his health regen alone. So overall, Bossk's weapon and hero stats are a bit of a mixed bag, with quite a few strengths but also a few notable weaknesses. I'll be going over some star cards and some tips that can help patch up these weaknesses later in this video, but first we need to talk about Bossk's abilities. As almost all heroes in the game, Bossk has 3 abilities, all of which are rather strong. To start out, we have his first ability, Dioxis Grenade. When using this ability, Bossk will throw a single grenade, which upon impact will start spewing out toxic gas within about 5 meter radius, dealing around 20 damage per second to everyone standing in it, even through walls and solid objects. The effect will linger for 6 seconds before disappearing. This is an incredible ability for deterring enemies from holding certain positions or just dealing consistent damage over time, but it's almost never going to be enough to kill any enemy by itself. The Deoxys Grenade has a cooldown of 20 seconds, which is pretty average for hero abilities. This cooldown is a bit special, however, as it starts the moment the Deoxys Grenade is used, rather than the moment the effect expires. Most abilities with an active time behave like Yoda's Presence ability. They don't go on cooldown until their effect is ended. This difference may not sound like a very big deal, but I can assure you that it really is. Having the ability go on cooldown instantly means that the effective cooldown is shorter than the actual cooldown, as the Deoxys Grenade will still be active while the ability recharges. So even without any star cards or officer recharges, the effective cooldown is only 14 seconds, which is rather short. This is of course assuming that you don't waste your Deoxys Grenade, as it will still take 20 seconds before you can throw another one. The ability going on cooldown instantly also means that you can have several Deoxys Grenades active at the same time, but this is of course only possible while having your abilities recharged by an officer. And with that, let's move on to Bossk's second ability, Predator Instincts, which is easily one of the best abilities in the entire game. This ability does quite a few things when activated, the most important feature being the thermal vision it grants, but it also switches Bossk's weapon to using micro grenades and increases his speed. Having vision of all enemies is extremely powerful and adds to Bossk's survivability, as with this ability being active, it is almost impossible to ambush him. The cooldown is however on the longer side, sitting at 25 seconds, and to add on to this, the effective cooldown is even longer, as Predator Instincts also has a base duration of 25 seconds. But as the active time will decrease by about 1.5 seconds per micro grenade fired, it will usually not last that long. The grenades themselves deal 80 damage per hit with a rather small blast radius, so unless the enemies are standing next to each other, you're probably not hitting more than one person with each grenade. The size of the grenades is however pretty generous, making them easier to use than its normal blaster. Predator Instincts is extremely useful for situational awareness and for dealing damage through lightsaber blocks, but its somewhat long cooldown makes sure you can't be using it all the time. Bossk's third and final ability is his Proximity Mines, which he can place down to blow up any enemy who gets too close. By default, he will place 3 mines, which will deal 76 damage each, with an inner blast radius of 5 meters and an outer blast radius of 6 meters. This means that enemies standing just on the edge of the blast radius will take less damage, while enemies standing in the inner blast radius will receive a total of 228 damage. The proximity mines will take about 2.5 seconds to arm after the ability is used, so they can't really be used as a reactionary tool in a fight. As a result, they are often best used preemptively before the fight starts. The ability has a cooldown of 20 seconds, but the cooldown starts as soon as they are deployed, meaning that in some cases you will be able to place down new mines just after the previous ones blow up. Unlike the Deoxys Grenade, you can however not have 2 sets of mines placed down at once. If you place new mines, it will simply replace the old set of mines. A noteworthy property of the proximity mines is that the only way for the enemy to remove them is to walk near them to make them explode. This makes them an incredible tool for blocking certain narrow pathways or preventing enemies from going near an objective. This ability combined with the Deoxys Grenade are the main components of Bossk's very effective defensive playstyle. And that's all for the proximity mines, and with all of Bossk's abilities covered, let's move on to his star cards and how they can be used to improve his kit. As all heroes in the game, Bossk has a total of 9 star cards, but unlike most heroes, the majority of his cards are actually pretty strong and impactful. Some cards are however better than others, so let's start this section off with the one card that you should almost never take off, that being Multi-Traps. Multi-Traps is a very simple card. It increases the amount of proximity mines placed by 2, so instead of placing 3 mines, Bossk will now place 5. It also increases the detonation radius of the mines by 25%, but this doesn't really do that much. The main reason for using this card is obviously going to be those 2 extra mines, which will bump up the damage of the proximity mines to a total of 380 damage. With this increase, the mines will now be able to kill most reinforcements on their own and deal very heavy damage to enemy heroes. This makes this card a must-have in pretty much every situation. For the rest of Bossk's star cards, what you want to use may depend a little on which mode you're playing, as his playstyle varies a bit between Heroes vs Villains and the large-scale game modes. And before someone hops into the comments and asks, I'm not going to be talking about Hero Showdown, because if you play that mode, and for some reason you really want to pick Bossk, I refuse to believe that you actually exist. But for those of you who don't exist, you should use the same star cards as for Heroes vs Villains. So, let's actually talk about star cards for specific game modes, and let's begin with my personal favorite mode, Supremacy. I've spent most of my time in this game playing this mode, and I'm very certain that there is only one star card build you should be using. The first card of this build is of course Multi-Traps, as it is easily Bossk's strongest card. The second card of this build is a Lingering Deoxys. This card increases the duration of the Deoxys grenade from 6 seconds to 12 seconds, making it last twice as long. This is an incredible effect not only because of Bossk's insane potential for area denial with this card, but also because, as I mentioned previously, the cooldown of the Deoxys grenade starts the moment it is used. This makes this card reduce the effective cooldown of the ability down to just 8 seconds, an absurdly short downtime for such a strong effect. The final card you should be using, which just so happens to combo exceptionally well with Lingering Deoxys, is Name Your Poison. This card makes Bossk heal 30 health per second while inside the Deoxys grenade, which helps patch up one of his biggest weaknesses, his health regeneration speed. This is an invaluable effect when you're in a tough spot, as the extra healing this card provides will often be the reason you survive a long drawn-out fight rather than dying. Another large contributing factor for the strength of this card is that it helps Bossk stay active in a fight rather than having to retreat to recover, as the total healing provided when combined with Lingering Deoxys is a whopping 360 health, provided you actually stay in the Deoxys cloud for the entire duration. So in summary, I think there is really only one star card loadout worth using in Supremacy, that being Multi-Traps, Lingering Deoxys, and Name Your Poison. The consistency of these cards is simply unmatched. Moving on to Galactic Assault, I would say that there are a lot more viable star cards to choose from in this mode, which makes it a bit more difficult to definitively say what star card build is the best, as it may depend a little on your playstyle and the map you're playing on. You can't really go wrong with the loadout consisting of Multi-Traps, Lingering Deoxys, and Name Your Poison that I recommended for Supremacy, but you may want to consider dropping either Name Your Poison or Lingering Deoxys for trap arming speed. This card makes your proximity mines arm 60% faster, making the arming time go down to just over 1 second. The reasoning behind this switch up is that Galactic Assault as a mode forces both you and the enemy team to move around more and not stay in the same spot as much. It can then be very valuable to be able to deploy your mines on the fly if you find yourself in a bad spot. Whether you decide to swap out Lingering Deoxys or Name Your Poison ultimately comes down to whether you value the area denial and damage from the former or the survivability granted by the latter, but both can work. I do also want to mention a completely different and very aggressive star card build that can work on some Galactic Assault maps. This loadout consists of the cards Ultimate Predator, Predator Resilience, and either Name Your Poison or Multi-Traps. The main point of this star card build is to mainly rely on Predator Instincts rather than the other abilities. This has the very notable downside of making Bossk a lot weaker against other heroes and some tanky reinforcements, while also making him very reliant on Predator Instincts to be active. The upside is that he becomes an absolute trooper-killing machine, but due to the very exploitable weaknesses of this setup, it's not exactly something you want to be using in a lobby full of very strong players. The core of this build is the card Ultimate Predator, which extends the duration of Predator Instincts by 7.5 seconds for every kill you get with the microgrenades or the proximity mines. This card lets you keep Predator Instincts active for far longer and enables the second card in this build, Predator Resilience. This card gives Bossk 20% damage reduction when Predator Instincts is active, and if I'm going to be honest, I think it is extremely overrated. I've seen a lot of people using this card across all modes, but in most cases I think there are just better options. However, for this build in particular, I think it actually works really well in giving Bossk the added survivability he needs. For the third card, I think there are really only two options, Multi-Traps or Name Your Poison. Multi-Traps is an obvious choice in that it's simply Bossk's best card in a vacuum, and the extra mines will almost always come in handy at some point. Name Your Poison is a pretty good alternative if you really want to double down on survivability, as the extra healing it gives you can be extremely useful. I think there's a good case to be made for either card, but it may depend a little on the map and your preferred playstyle. I think this build is the only time where it may be fine to actually not use Multi-Traps. I do also really want to empathize that playing Bossk aggressively is much more difficult than a normal cautious and defensive playstyle you will be having most of the time, so if you don't have that much experience playing Bossk, I would not recommend this build. This star card loadout does also come with a fatal flaw in that officer players using the Disruption star card can instantly deactivate your Predator Instincts, and with your entire build focused on that ability, having it disabled will leave you very vulnerable. So in summary, there are two very different builds that I think are at least viable in Galactic Assault. The first loadout is more consistent and generally the one I think you should be using and consists of multi-traps, lingering deoxys, and name your poison or trap arming speed. The second loadout is more high risk but can be very rewarding if the enemy team doesn't have many strong reinforcement and hero players and consists of ultimate predator, predator resilience, and name your poison or multi-traps. And now for the final mode I'll be talking about, Heroes vs Villains, and what star cards you should be using here is actually pretty straightforward. In this game mode, you naturally want to start out with multi-traps as your first card, as having those 2 extra mines is vital to be able to cripple enemy heroes with your proximity mines. The second card I think you should be using is Trap Arming Speed. Unlike in the large scale game modes where you often have time to set your mines before a fight, you tend to not get that luxury in this mode. The decreased arming time will often mean the difference between your mines going off and killing an enemy light superhero or you getting the Revenge of the Sith Dooku treatment. For the final card, I think there are good cases to be made for both Lingering Deoxys to increase the duration of the Deoxys grenade and Name Your Poison to give you that little extra survivability. Both cards can work pretty well, but it kind of comes down to whether you value more consistent chip damage or the extra healing from the Deoxys grenade. And that's it for Heroes vs Villains, with there only really being one loadout I think you should be using, consisting of multi-traps, trap arming speed, and name your poison or lingering deoxys. Alright, so we have now gone over all modes and what cards you should be using for all of them, but I would also like to briefly take some time to explain why I think the other cards aren't as good and why they aren't worth using in most cases. Let's start this out with Spreading the Disease, which you shouldn't use for a very simple reason. It literally does nothing. It's supposed to increase the area of effect of the Deoxys grenade, but it has been broken since the launch of the game and just doesn't work. Don't use this one. Another star card you should never use is Sniper Expert. Unlike Spreading the Disease, this card actually works, but its effect is almost worthless. This card makes headshot kills with Bossk's blaster reset all weapon heat and disables heat buildup for a short time. The reason this is so useless is because as long as you fully charge up your scoped in shots, which you will almost always do, the heat buildup will disappear naturally between your shots, making this card completely pointless. As headshots deal no extra damage when using the non-scoped version of Bossk's weapon, you'd probably think this card doesn't work when hipfiring, but you'd actually be wrong, as strangely enough it does actually work. Regardless, this is still not very useful, as Bossk's weapon isn't that accurate, so you can't really rely on hitting headshots, and even then, the heat buildup for its weapon is usually not that big of a deal. The final card I haven't talked about is Unrelenting Predator, and unlike the other 2 cards I just talked about, this one actually has a pretty decent effect, that being reducing the cooldowns of the Deoxys grenade and the multi-traps by 14% for every kill you get with the micro grenades. This may sound pretty good on paper, but the reason you shouldn't use it is because of how terribly it combos with other cards. If you're using this card, you definitely also want to use Ultimate Predator to make Predator Instincts last as long as possible. You may even want to slap on Predator Resilience to make a full build dedicated to making Predator Instincts as powerful as possible. But here comes the issue. When dedicating your build to Predator Instincts in this way, you will have to drop the cards that make the Deoxys grenade and the proximity mines stronger, making it just not really worth it for them to have shorter cooldowns. In most cases, you'd be much better off just using a card such as the Lingering Deoxys, Name Your Poison, or Multi-Traps. With that, we have covered every single star card, so let's move on to Bossk's playstyle. There's quite a lot to cover when it comes to Bossk's playstyle, so I'd imagine this is probably going to be the longest part of the video. If I were to try to describe Bossk's gameplay strategy as short and concise as possible, I would say that his playstyle is mostly slow and cautious, with occasional bursts of aggressive play when the moment calls for it. To make all this a bit less rambly and more digestible, I'm going to divide this section of the video into 4 key parts, starting with the most important but also most difficult thing to learn, awareness and positioning. Bossk is not the kind of hero to be able to run around in the open and not get punished for it, so keeping tabs on where the enemies are and positioning yourself well is vital to staying alive. The general rule of thumb is to try to avoid taking mid-range fights and instead either use cover to approach or bait enemies toward you and fight at close range where Bossk's weapon and abilities are most effective. Bossk is of course a fantastic camper, so in most cases camping near an objective will be the most effective play to force enemies to come to you. In some cases where natural cover is sparse, retreating and sniping may be the best choice, but you generally don't want to snipe in the same spot for too long as it leaves you very vulnerable. One thing to keep in mind is that you typically don't want to run off completely on your own as Bossk, as you can quite easily die to just a few enemy reinforcements. Another reason for not wanting to stray too far away from your team is that Bossk is great at enabling his team to get easy kills by dealing consistent damage with his proximity mines and Dioxis grenade. For general map awareness, Predator Instincts is a fantastic tool to use, and you want to make sure you have a look around while using it to keep tabs on where the enemy team is. But as its uptime is rather limited, you should also be using the radar and be on the lookout for enemy heroes to make sure they don't get to walk up next to you for free. One thing that is often overlooked about Bossk is that his jump is great for easily getting to positions that would be difficult and annoying for most other Blaster heroes to get to, so make sure you take advantage of that. This also leads into the next key part of Bossk's playstyle, and that is to use his jump. Bossk's jump is one of the strongest resources in his kit, but it is often overlooked as it isn't very flashy. It is, however, a fantastic tool for Bossk to use to be unpredictable and hard to hit, so in most fights you want to constantly be jumping to avoid being an easy target. Constant jumps combined with the explosions from his mines and microgrenades and the limited vision inside the Dioxis grenade makes Bossk incredibly difficult to hit even for the best players in some scenarios. The jump is also very effective for climbing higher ground or jumping over smaller obstacles to make a quick escape to somewhere most troopers won't be able to follow you. The sheer speed of the jump also makes you able to in some cases use it to jump to elevated platforms or over obstacles faster than light superheroes, as their force jumps don't have the same velocity. There is, however, one scenario where you don't want to be jumping, and that is when you're fighting a light superhero who has their force abilities available. Jumping makes you a very easy target for them to push or pull around, and this leads into my next key advice. You want to make sure you dodge dangerous abilities. When speaking of dangerous abilities, I am of course mainly speaking of Anakin's Force Pull. You do not under any circumstance want to put yourself in a position where you can get pulled, as it is almost always a death sentence. Using cover and putting distance between you and an Anakin player are the best ways to make sure he can't get you. Other dangerous abilities include things such as Chewbacca's Shock Grenade, Han's Detonite Charge, and most Force abilities, as getting hit by them can either take a large chunk of your health, leave you out of position, or just make you very vulnerable to follow-ups. Basically, there are many abilities, mostly hero abilities, that can leave you in a position where you lose all your health in a single second, and one of your top priorities as Bossk is to make sure you avoid just that. You may think that I'm just stating the obvious. Just don't die. Wow, such great advice. And admittedly, I kind of am, but there is a very good reason why it's so important to avoid these scenarios as Bossk specifically, and that is because of his low base health and ability to regenerate his entire health bar. No matter how much health you lose, you will be able to fully recover if you survive the fight, so making sure you don't end up in a situation where you run the risk of losing all your health at once is naturally going to be very important. The final key advice I want to give before we move on to more game mode specific tips is to make sure you use your abilities efficiently. With some heroes, you really want to hold on to certain abilities for the perfect moment, but Bossk's abilities all have rather short cooldowns, so you should be using them as often as possible to get constant value from them. The Dioxis Grenade can often be used pretty much as soon as it comes off cooldown, as long as you have a couple enemies to throw it at. The same goes for Predator Instincts, as even if you don't have that many enemies to fire micro grenades at, the map awareness it gives is very impactful. For your proximity mines, you often want to use them as soon as you have them available if you don't already have mines placed somewhere. But even then, you shouldn't be afraid to reset your mines to a better position. There will of course be a few situations where holding on to your abilities for the perfect moment can help, such as when you see a big enemy push incoming, but in most cases, using your abilities as often as possible will be ideal. Your ultimate goal is to maximize the value you get from your abilities while still using them as often as possible. Before we go over Bossk's playstyle in specific game modes, I do want to mention some general tips that might come in handy. When throwing the Dioxis grenade, make sure you don't throw the grenade on the ground where you are standing or a wall that you're standing next to. This might in some cases cause it to either disappear entirely or make the gas cloud invisible, which can be quite a hassle. Hey, editing Paul here. I did some further testing to make sure I wasn't lying about this, and what I just said was only half correct. Throwing the Dioxis grenade at a wall right next to you will often make it disappear, but when throwing it at the ground below you, it seems to be highly dependent on the terrain, where it will usually work just fine in flat terrain. However, I made another discovery that I found to be a lot more interesting. My whole idea that the grenade disappears is mainly based on the fact that I've had it happen when I've thrown it onto a wall or the ground below me while using the Name Your Poison card to heal myself. And in some cases, I've seen the grenade disappear and then as a result received no healing from it. However, what I quickly found when testing is that the grenade does in fact not disappear entirely, as it will still be able to damage enemies even if the gas cloud is invisible. It will just not provide any healing. This made me think that the healing from Name Your Poison is tied to the physical grenade prop, which would make some kind of sense. However, this is not true either, as a similar effect will occur when you throw the grenade at a droidic shield, personal shield, or squad shield. The grenade will then seemingly disappear and provide no healing, just as when you throw it at a wall next to you. But if you look a little bit closer, you can actually see the physical grenade prop will often be visible on the ground next to the shield. So at this point, I have no idea why the grenade has such a strange interaction with Name Your Poison, where it just won't heal you, but it will still damage enemies. Maybe some smart modder would be able to dive into the code and tell me why this is the case, because I'm genuinely very curious. Anyway, this has turned into a whole long tangent, so let's get back to talk about some gameplay tips. Something to keep in mind when using Predator Instincts that I don't see a lot of people taking advantage of is that you can actually cancel the ability early if you don't have any enemies to fire at. This can be quite helpful as the ability will then go on cooldown and be available to use again sooner. When using Bossk's proximity mines, you can actually jump to spread them out over a large area to cover more ground. This of course comes with the downside of them not being as lethal anymore, as one mine isn't even enough to kill a normal trooper, but sometimes you may want to increase the area covered by the mines. Another thing you may want to keep in mind for the proximity mines is that they are actually rather smart, and if a base class trooper steps to your mines, only 2 or 3 of them will blow up in most cases, as that's all that's needed to kill the trooper. However, this only holds true if the mines were already armed when the enemy came into their blast radius. If there is an enemy within the blast radius of the mines when they arm, they will always blow up instantly, no matter the enemy's current health. This can in some scenarios lead to all your mines being wasted on a single low health trooper if you place them on top of them. So this is definitely something you want to avoid in case you need the mines to damage an enemy hero or reinforcement. In some cases, when you deploy your proximity mines, the moment you get hit by an enemy knockdown ability, such as Anakin's Heroic Might, the mines will still deploy, despite them not going on cooldown. You can use this to your advantage to essentially get 2 sets of mines right after each other, but it's kind of difficult to trigger this intentionally, as you almost never want to get hit by knockdown abilities in the first place. This does also kind of work for Predator Instincts, but in that case you will just get the speed boost without activating the ability, and the speed boost will be retained until you use the ability again, and it goes on cooldown. Now, let's finally talk about specific game modes, and let's once again begin with the mode I'm most familiar with, Supremacy. In this mode, the general cautious playstyle of Bossk of course still applies, and this mode suits Bossk pretty well due to how good he is at defending areas, such as command posts. Bossk really shines when attacking or defending command posts together with his team. As Bossk, you typically want to be at the command post that most of the enemy team is attacking to get maximum value out of your strong area control abilities. In most even matches, this will most likely be command post C, but don't be afraid to move around to other command posts depending on where your team is and the flow of the match. Predator Instincts is absolutely incredible in this mode, as it will show you where most of the enemy team is located, giving you a hint of where you should be heading next. All the previous advice applies to both Republic and Rebel era Supremacy, but going forward I will only be talking about Republic Supremacy. As this is the mode I'm most familiar with, this is the only case where I'll be talking about specific maps, but the general rule of thumb is that Bossk doesn't do too well on large open maps and excels on smaller and closed maps, where enemies have to push through choke points. In Supremacy, his best map is undoubtedly Naboo, as it's just a really good map for heroes in general as long as you watch out for tanks. Most of the command posts have natural cover which Bossk can use to bait enemies into his proximity mines and Dioxis Grenade. Camino comes after Naboo as the second best map for Bossk. It's not as good as Naboo due to there being a lot of very open areas where Bossk can struggle, but there being no tanks on the map is definitely a huge plus. Kashyyyk and Felucia are both not great for Bossk as they are even more open than Camino, which makes them incredible maps for jet troopers and tanks. I still lean toward Kashyyyk being better though, as Bossk can still put up a pretty good fight at the very enclosed command posts C and B. The absolute worst map for Bossk is however undoubtedly Geonosis. Geo is an extremely open map and a perfect playground for tanks, snipers, and jet troopers. Naturally, this is an absolute nightmare for Bossk, who can have trouble dealing with those classes even on favorable maps. The only chance a Bossk player really has is to camp at Command Post C and snipe, but as I mentioned previously, this is not an ideal playstyle. I do also want to talk a little about ship defenses, because as many of you probably know, that's when Bossk is at his absolute strongest. For the first phase of the defense, you typically don't want to push up any further than the 2 capture points, as you will then leave most natural cover. Staying near the back also gives you the option of retreating inside the doors, should you have to. Just please don't be the guy sitting in the upper window and sniping his Bossk. At that point, you're actually being a detriment to your team by hogging a hero slot while not doing anything. For the second phase of the boarding, you will almost always want to stay in the back together with your team to throw dioxys and place proximity mines. It is usually a good idea to have the mines guarding one hallway while throwing your dioxys down another. In most cases, the most effective place for the dioxys is at the bottom of the hallway closest to the clone spawn, where it will then catch any enemy trying to push through that path as well as the people walking by above it. In this phase, it is extremely important to manage your predator instincts well to know where you need to be to stop the enemy team, as you are playing the strongest defensive role on your team. I guess I should probably also address the elephant in the room: recharge officers. While being recharged, Bossk can throw out an ungodly amount of dioxys and have a very high uptime on predator instincts. This doesn't really change his playstyle, however, it just makes him more consistent at holding off enemies at multiple places at once, as you can have several dioxys grenades active at the same time. And that's really all I have to say about Supremacy, so let's move on to the other large-scale game mode, Galactic Assault. In Galactic Assault, Bossk honestly plays very similarly compared to Supremacy, at least when on the defending team, as you will still want to hold down the objectives and choke points that the enemy team will pass through. This is still a bit different from Supremacy, as the objectives are not always just capture zones, but in most cases you will still be able to use your Dioxys Grenade and proximity mines to great effect. When on the attacking team, Bossk can be more difficult to play due to how it kind of clashes with his passive playstyle. In this case, you still want to use your abilities on choke points and objectives where most of the enemy team will be to push them back and help your team advance. On larger maps with many objectives, this may not always be so easy, but kind of sticking with your team and playing a bit of a supportive role usually works very well. Just as in Supremacy, Bossk is going to be performing best on smaller maps, especially those with indoor sections, and may struggle on larger maps with little cover. Because of his versatility, Bossk can be played on any map, but in some cases it may be difficult to play him without having to resort to sniping, which is not ideal. With Galactic Assault covered, let's talk about heroes versus villains, and here the way Bossk is played changes quite a lot compared to the large-scale game modes. This is mainly because of the fact that there isn't any objective or area that you need to control. Instead, your objective will be to stick with your team and keep your distance from the enemy saber heroes. In this mode, using your mines correctly is essential for staying alive, as they can cripple enemy heroes before they reach you. If you find yourself standing next to a lightsaber-wielding opponent without your mines out, odds are you are probably dead. Using your Dioxys Grenade to deal additional damage in the middle of fights and preventing enemy heroes from regenerating can of course be very effective. Predator Instincts can be extremely useful in this mode to single out enemy heroes who spawn out of position before they are able to regroup with their team. The microgrenades are also a strong counter to enemy saber heroes who love holding down that block button. After all this talk about how Bossk's abilities are very useful in this mode, I also want to make something very clear, as this is the main mistake I see Bossk players make in this mode. They don't use his normal weapon enough. Bossk's weapon is extremely lethal at close ranges, and a sniper mode can be used very effectively to deal heavy damage before the fight even starts, but a lot of Bossk players seem too focused on spamming abilities and dodging to really take advantage of his gun, so just make sure you aren't making that mistake. I also want to stress again that playing with your team really is the only way to play Bossk in Heroes vs Villains, as in this mode he is very much a glass cannon that's able to deal tons of damage but also able to die very quickly. And that's pretty much the end of this guide. This video took an absolutely unreasonable amount of time to make, as it's very different from my usual content. So if you did end up enjoying this video or found it useful, please let me know, as I definitely wouldn't be opposed to making more videos like this one. And if you think I missed something in this very long guide, feel free to let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.